The Battle of the Goblin Village, the Fang Wolves. The undisputed rulers of the Eastern Plains. For merchants trading between the Eastern Empire and the nations surrounding the Forest of Jura, they were a constant source of trouble. Each wolf was a monster of C-rank equivalent, capable of killing even a veteran adventurer in a single strike if they let their guard down. However, the true threat lay in their pack behavior. Led by a capable boss, the Fang Wolves could unleash their full potential, moving as one with perfect coordination, like a single monster. As a pack, their threat level was evaluated to be equivalent to a B-rank monster. The Eastern Plains bordered a vast granary. This made it a crucial lifeline for the Empire, and its security was ironclad. No matter how cunning or capable the Fang Wolves were, they couldn't breach the Empire's defenses. Even if they did, it would only incur the Empire's wrath, bringing about the end of their entire species. The pack boss understood this well. Through decades of skirmishes with the Empire, he had learned this lesson deeply. As long as they only preyed on small-time merchants, the Empire wouldn't get seriously involved. But if they ever dared to set foot in the granary, the Empire would bare its fangs. The boss wouldn't repeat the mistakes that his brethren had made in the past. However, as a monster, he also knew that if they stayed like this, their evolution would stagnate. Fang Wolves don't actually need to eat to survive. Eating humans was just a little snack for them. That's because humans don't contain much magicule essence. For the Fang Wolves, eating was a way to absorb magicule essence. They had two choices to evolve into a catastrophe-class monster. Either hunt a more powerful monster or kill a large number of humans. Neither of these options was viable at the moment. The Empire was too powerful for the Fang Wolves to overcome, and simply continuing to attack merchants would never lead to an evolution of catastrophe class. It was a pipe dream. The boss had heard rumors of a paradise to the south, with fertile lands, the blessings of the forest, and powerful monsters rich in magicule essence. But to get there, they would have to pass through the Forest of Jura. The monsters in the forest themselves weren't a big deal. They had hunted some that wandered out of the forest before. So why hadn't they invaded the forest until now? The reason was none other than the storm dragon Veldora. Even sealed away, the ominous surge of his magicule essence terrified them. They believed the monsters in that forest were protected by Veldora's blessing, which was why they could live in such a dangerous magical wave. If that wasn't the case, they would have to be insane. For years, they had gritted their teeth and given up on invading the forest because of his presence. Until now. The boss turned his sharp, blood-red eyes towards the forest. The presence of that detestable evil dragon was gone. Now, he thought, it wouldn't be impossible to hunt down the forest monsters and become the new ruler of the forest. The boss licked his lips at the thought, then let out a howl, the signal to advance. Now, as a protector of the village, maybe I should do something. I think of myself as a bodyguard, but the village chief is making a big deal out of it. Anyway, I asked him to gather any goblins who could fight. They all looked battered and bruised. I couldn't expect much from them in terms of fighting power. But when I looked around, the only remaining goblins watching from a distance were kids and the elderly. There would be no reinforcements from other goblin villages. For the village chief, this situation must have been terrifying enough to drive him mad. There was nowhere to run, and if they did, they would just starve to death without a food source. The goblins who were gathered looked at me with an almost religious devotion. This was heavy. I, who had lived my life without ever feeling pressure, found this gaze to be a tremendous weight. Do you all understand the situation? It wasn't a time for jokes, and I couldn't think of any clever words, so I just asked a serious question. Yes, we are ready for a battle of life and death, the goblin leader immediately replied. The other goblins gathered around him seemed to feel the same way. Some were trembling, but that was to be expected. The mind and body are two different things. Don't worry about it too much. Just relax. You'll lose when you lose, whether you're stressed or not. Just focus on doing your best. I said something I thought sounded cool. It made me feel better. Maybe it actually works. All right, let's get started. If I fail, the goblin's fate might be sealed. But even so, I'm going my own way. I've decided to be arrogant and proud. Okay, with renewed motivation, I gave the goblins their first command. It was the first of many commands I would give. Night fell. The Fangwolf boss opened his eyes. It was a full moon tonight, perfect for a battle. Slowly, he got up and looked around. His brethren, the Fangwolves, watched him with bated breath. The tension was just right, the boss thought. Tonight, they would destroy that goblin village and establish a foothold in the forest of Jura. After that, they would slowly hunt the surrounding monsters and become the rulers of the forest. In time, they would set their sights on invading the south in search of even greater power. They had the strength to do it. Their claws could tear through any monster, and their fangs could chew through any armor. Woo!
The boss roared, signaling the start of their rampage. But there was something that bothered him. A few days ago, his scouts had brought back some troubling information. There was a small monster with an unusual magical aura, and that monster's aura was said to be even greater than his own, the boss. That can't be right, the boss thought, dismissing the claim. He hadn't felt any such threat in this forest. All the monsters they had encountered were weak. They hadn't faced any real resistance until they reached their current location in the middle of the forest. One time, a dozen or so goblins had managed to kill a few of his brethren, but that was it. The scouts must have been overexcited and mistaken. Thinking this, the boss turned his gaze forward. He could see the village in the distance, just as the scouts had reported. They had found its location by tracking an injured goblin. The village's forces wouldn't amount to much now. The boss was cunning and didn't let his guard down. But he saw something unfamiliar surrounding the village, something that looked like a fence from a human village. The houses had been torn down, and a fence had been built around the village with the materials. In front, there was an opening, and a single slime stood there. How clever, the boss sneered. The goblins must have made a single opening to prevent them from attacking all at once. What foolish ideas from such pathetic monsters. A fence like that would be useless against their claws and fangs. Let's show them our power, he thought, and gave the command. A dozen Fangwolves, acting as if they were his own limbs, began to attack the fence. The Fangwolves moved as one monster, their true potential unleashed in a perfectly coordinated attack. This was made possible by telepathy, which allowed for faster coordination than spoken words. The fence should have been destroyed in the first strike. The boss had imagined the goblins panicking as their plan fell apart, but instead he cried out in surprise. The group that attacked the fence was repelled. Some were even sent flying to the ground, blood spraying. What's going on? The boss paused and watched. The slime in the opening hadn't moved. Had he done something? At that moment, one of his subordinates came up to him. That's the one with the stronger magical aura than you, boss. Don't be ridiculous, the boss thought, looking at the slime. A tiny monster that sometimes appeared on the plains, too insignificant to even be called a monster. It was impossible for it to have a stronger aura than him. At that moment, the slime called out. All right, hold it right there. If you turn back now, I won't do anything. Just get out of here. The Fangwolf boss was a cunning and experienced monster. He used his decades of experience to create a plan without letting his guard down, and he had the courage to calmly carry it out. But his years of experience told him to deny the possibility that this monster might be stronger than him. At this moment, the boss made his first fatal mistake, and that mistake sealed his fate. Arrr! Grrr! You're so clever. I'll crush you to a pulp." The battle had begun. Wow, I was surprised. I didn't expect him to just charge at me. I had planned to start with a negotiation, but all the lines I had prepared went out the window. All that practice I squeezed in between tasks was a waste. My first command to the goblins was to take me to the injured. Adding a dozen or so survivors to a group of 60 wouldn't change the efficiency of the work much. But since they were so devoted to me, I wanted to do what I could for them. They were all laid out in a large, dirty-looking building. Looking at the injured, I thought to myself, they had been treated with what looked like medicinal herbs, but if left like this, they would surely die. The wounds were deeper than I thought. They had been torn open by claws and fangs and were festering. This called for something special. I ate the one closest to me, then spat him out after pouring a healing potion on him in my stomach. The village chief was about to say something, but I ignored him and proceeded to swallow and spit out every one of the injured. When I was done with a few of them and turned around, the goblins were prostrating themselves and peeking at me. What are they doing? It seemed they had misunderstood and thought I had the power of resurrection. Since it was too much of a hassle to explain, I just spat out a few healing potions and had them heal the rest. This was going to take some time to heal. Once the treatments were done, I gave the goblins a new command: build a fence. It would have been best to cut down trees and build it, but we didn't have the time or resources. We had to work with what we had. Without hesitation, I had them tear down their houses and use the materials to build a circular fence around the entire perimeter of the village. While they were working, I sent out the most observant goblins with bows as scouts. Since our opponents were wolves, they would have a keen sense of smell. I instructed them not to overdo it and sent them on their way. I was a little worried about their determined looks, as if they were about to say, "I'll do this even if it costs me my life." They were so dramatic.
The fence was completed the next evening. I went in to add the finishing touches. I used sticky thread to fix the fence in place and increase its strength. I also didn't forget to set up some steel thread traps in various places. Anyone who touched the fence without knowing would be sliced to bits. I'd have to remember to collect them after the battle. I made an opening in the front of the fence. Once I covered it with sticky thread, our preparations would be complete. I waited for the scouts to return. Around that time, the injured goblins began to wake up, fully healed. They were touching themselves, looking confused, checking their bodies in disbelief. The healing potion seemed to be more effective than I thought. I had expected them to need multiple doses because of how serious their injuries were, but its potency was a happy surprise. We gathered the remaining scrap materials in the center of the village and lit a fire. It looked like a campfire, but it was no time to celebrate. We had to be on guard all night. I told them I would stand guard since I don't need sleep, but they responded with, "Absolutely not. We cannot allow you, Lord Ramiro, to do such a thing." "That's right, we will stand guard. Please rest, Lord Ramiro." And the others around them were like, "Yes, that's right." I appreciated their sentiment, but they were the ones who were exhausted. I had no choice but to create a rotation and have everyone but the watchmen rest. Just before midnight, the scouts returned. The fang wolves had started to move. They were all wounded, but they had all made it back alive. I had thought of them as ugly, dirty monsters, but I had grown fond of them over these 2 days. I wished that not a single one of them would be lost in this battle. With that thought, I set up the final sticky thread in the opening. The fang wolves' attack had begun. I was worried about the fence's durability, but it wasn't destroyed by their attacks. The traps seemed to be working well, too. I was relieved. Just in case, I had called out, "All right, hold it right there. If you turn back now, I won't do anything. Just get out of here." But they easily ignored me. The fang wolves all started to move at once, attacking the fence from all sides. There was nothing I could do. I just hoped the plan would go well. I had anticipated this, so the fence had small gaps in it, like arrow slits. The goblins, though clumsy, shot their bows through the slits. A few fang wolves cried out in pain as they were hit by the arrows. Some of the wolves tried to pry open the slits, but they were quickly decapitated by the goblins with stone axes waiting on either side. Zzz. They didn't have 2 hours to practice, but they were desperate. They desperately tried to understand and follow my instructions, and now their efforts were paying off. The fangwolves are strong, it's true. A single one could probably take on several goblins. In a pack, their combat power might increase significantly. But if they're strong individually, we'll just gang up on them. And if they're strong in a pack, we'll just break them up. The point is, you can deal with anything if you use your head. The strongest creature in this world is a smart human. You were out of luck, I thought, and stared at the fangwolf boss with cold eyes. For a mere beast to think he could beat me, it was a complete overestimation of his abilities. The fangwolf boss was flustered by how differently things were unfolding from his plan. His subordinates were starting to hesitate. This was bad. The fangwolves are a species that truly showed their worth as a group. A lack of trust in their boss could lead to a fatal outcome. The boss understood this well. Because of this, he made his biggest mistake yet. He was furious at his comrades for being so useless they couldn't even break a simple fence, but he was afraid of their anger turning on him. The boss decided he needed to show off his power. He would show them he was the strongest in the pack and strong enough on his own. At that moment, everything was decided. I hadn't taken my eyes off the fangwolf boss's movements. To the goblins around me, it probably looked like the boss had just vanished. But to me, his movements were in slow motion. Everything was going according to plan. I had considered several scenarios, and this was one of them. Just a beast, no match for a human. The boss was caught in the sticky thread I had set up in the opening. The fangwolf boss might have had the power to cut the sticky thread, I had no way of knowing for sure. But it didn't matter. The purpose of the sticky thread was to stop the boss's movements for just an instant. It would be embarrassing if I used water blade without stopping him and he dodged it. It would be even worse if I hit one of my allies. Given the situation on the battlefield, that wasn't an impossible scenario. This was the reason for the trap, but it seemed I had overthought it. The wolves never even got to the point of breaking the fence. I had considered setting up steel thread in the opening as well, but I decided against it in case I couldn't land the final blow. In this situation, I needed to play the part of an overwhelmingly strong being. That's what the trap was for. Without hesitation, I used water blade and cut off the boss's head. The fangwolf boss died easily. Listen, fangwolves, your boss is dead. I'll give you a choice. Submission or death. Now, how will they respond? I hope they don't go crazy and charge at me to avenge their boss.